Good morning. Good morning and good morning. How are you doing this morning? Well, it is the Friday before Father's Day. So I'm going to ask you early, are you stuck? And the reason I'm going to do that is because today we're going to be stuck on fathers. Just the wonderment of fathers, the beauty of fathers, and of course, the love of a father. Um, and we have a father, those of us who believe we're Christians and we believe that our Father up above protects us, guides us, gives us everything that we need. In spite of what we think we need, He's still got it for us. And so that would be what I call the head father. But then He also gave us an earthly father. And some of you may not know your fathers, and some of you know them real well, and some of you didn't have a great relationship with them, or maybe it's growing. And then there's myself. I had a great father, and so I'm excited about the father that I had. Today, I can still look back on memories, which Willie talked about. Wow, what a wonderful man! He was just a good man. And I remember my mother always marveling at, well, you got to leave that for your father, and you got to make sure that your dad has this. And so she would always look out for him. They had that kind of relationship. And so I'm gonna ask you this morning, put a note on your little screen to talk about your father. Talk about him today. If he's living, wonderful. If he's moved on up north, up to the heavens, okay. Still acknowledge him. Acknowledge what it is he did, and also acknowledge what he may not have done. Because to me, being a parent is sometimes it could cause some toughness to it. It could cause us where we don't know what to do because children come without instructions and parents also come without instructions. So we do the best we can. Sometimes we don't do all we can, but we sometimes may be just doing as much as our time or our money or whatever allowed for. And so we certainly want to recognize all fathers today, present or in absence. We want to recognize our fathers. So, anyway, we want to talk about the fathers in such a way that we want to talk about their goodness, their kindness, and the possibility of what could it be about a father that we need to know. And so I'm going to start off with a poem by Sue Skeen, and it's called A Father Is. And I found this on the internet. But I really like it. Good morning, Valda. Good morning, Kathleen. Anyway, it talks about there in every memory. See his love and care. Strength and hands to count on. Freely he does share. Provider tolls so faithfully to make our dreams come true. Give strong and tender discipline, though it is hard to do. A father is God's chosen one to lead the family and point it to this will for life of love and harmony. I love this poem. It was really simple, but I loved it because it talked about the fact, and that was my dad. My dad was hard to give us discipline. He would, but he didn't like to. He kind of left that to my mother because my mother was probably she was the more harshest of the two. She'd go get you. She would send us to go get our switch of choice. And of course, the little ones hurt, the big ones hurt. So after a while, I just knew how to stay out of trouble. I just knew. I learned from watching her get the other kids. But anyway, and then their love may not be the kind of love that maybe the mom shows, but I know I was a daddy's girl. And sometimes daddy's girls have a tendency to be able to sway daddy. And I was able to do that. I just was, whenever dad wanted to go, down to the city, to New York City, he would say, "Hey, Sam, come on and get in the car." So I'd jump up in there and we would ride to the city. Another friend of his, and his daughter, Vernell. We would all just ride down to the city. We'd stop. We'd get something to eat. We'd laugh. We'd talk. And my dad and I were just always close like that. And so we have to remember that the memories we have of our upbringing really instills in us what we should do going forward. Even if we don't have kids, we need to know that the love that our parents gave us, if we were so blessed, and I can say that if we were blessed, I don't take it for granted, because I've counseled many a person who years later are still suffering from the fact that they never knew their dad, or they never had a relationship with them, or that he came and he left, you know. And sometimes relationships, marriages, love ships fall apart. And when they fall apart, they don't always make sure that the kids are cared for continuously, that they know and understand just enough that makes it so that they can go forward living their lives, still loving who they are regardless of who's around. Because to me, even I've met other people that have become stepfathers, godfathers, just fathers, okay? Just stand in the gap kind of people. Like, if there's anything you need, is there anything you want, I'll be here for you. I've seen men who have paid for other people's children to go to school, or help them out in getting a car, or help them when the car breaks down, and somebody to call on. And see, sometimes you have to understand that father isn't just with the seed, okay, of sperm. It isn't. It isn't. Fatherhood could be just the fact that there's just goodness, just kindness, understanding, and willingness to do it. Willingness. To me, that's a great father. That is a great father and a father figure. So anyway, getting to our little lesson today and talking about fathers, I said, well, let me look up, pardon the expression, I have such little space here, but it's my best space that I can see in my house, but pardon me when I get too many papers. But anyway, father, it says a man, it says relation to a child or children. But it says, but it's also a patriarch, a dad, a stepdad, a daddy, a pop, a pops, a papa, an old man. We got all kinds of nicknames for people that may be in that, what I call that figure of pa. Okay. And so we can certainly go with that. Good morning, Rhonda. And so we can talk about that. What is a father? And sometimes we may just call him, him home, or he's home, and I know when I was little, my dad come home, my mother said, if you don't go sit down, let me talk to him first. Okay. So sometimes we just, good morning, Tricia. We don't know what they have done before they get back to the house. But a lot of times it's in preparation for what they're going to bring into their role as being a father, as being a dad, as being, a husband of a wife that they had children between. Or it could be that they're acting in the role of father as a step, because the children were born of another father's seed. So it doesn't really matter. What it talks about is just the whole concept of just loving, the beauty of it, the wonder of it. Because there are kids I know I've kind of adopted over the years. I try to make sure if I don't miss a birthday, or I make sure I take them out and do something special with them. To me, that's my mothering instinct that comes through, my auntie, mother kind of instinct. And I think it's a great thing. But sometimes, there's great misfortune with people who weren't given that opportunity. Good morning, Miss Grace. They weren't given that opportunity to really know what a father is. But I know many of you can talk about the fathers that you had and what you got from them. Being a 10th child out of 9 others, I became special to my dad. And so for me, my father, I can speak on it, was a good man. And he was so good. He worked 3 jobs, and his first stroke was when he was 49, and his second stroke, which actually took his life, was when he was we're not sure, because back then they had them strange records. We're thinking between 51 and 53. We weren't sure because we found 2 different birth records. But anyway, he was a good man. And so I'm hoping that that's the same feeling you have for yours. But even so, we're still going to talk about what a father is. So if the F in father, I'm still going to break it down the Johari way. It talks about him being family, him being a part of a family. And it's either a family that he, bore children in. They had children between he and his wife, woman. They had children. And it talks about the alignment of that he's at the, basically like almost like the patriarch of it. He's the parent. He's in the acting position, and they're together, and it can be in a household. And sometimes people are fathers to children that they do not live with. Good morning, Susan. They don't live with them, but nonetheless, it doesn't change the role. And many times you'll find that they will follow still wherever their children are. They will set up accounts for them, whatever they need. They will go into what I call that mode of alignment of, you can call on me. I'm here for you. I'm right here for you. And so it talks about it just being the root of the family, the patriarch of the family or the household, the family tree. They're like the base of the tree, that goes into the ground. They're holding everything up. They're the foundation. It talks about being the nucleus of the family, being also the forefather. And, I know they talk about forefather, but that usually means talking about ones that were before. And so it does talk about that when people come from a lineage, a long lineage of understanding that father to son, son to son, son to son, and all of them can become fathers. And so that would talk about family. That talks about family. The second letter in father is allegiance. And to me, allegiance is loyalty. It's commitment. They've made a statement of that they're going to take care of business, regardless if they're in the household or without, or not in the household. They still know their requirement to do something. And so it talks about them really being in a supervisory position, in a position of authority, really looking at their loyalty towards that, their faithfulness towards that. It talks about their trustworthiness and the fact that you can go to somebody that's in your family, that's the father or a father figure, and they'll be able to assist you. They'll be able to do something for you. It talks about them being obedient, understanding that once the child came, the child was always a part of their lives. Sometimes it doesn't always hold true, but when it does, you certainly have to honor it. It talks about being a part of an inheritance, that they inherited these children, and that the lineage is there, that there's a steadfast need for them to be around. There's their own devotion, there's their bond. Because I don't know, as I said, I was bonded with my dad, and I don't know about you, but if you were bonded to the man that was your father, oh my goodness, and I love to see fathers and daughters and fathers and sons just out having a good time with themselves, just enjoying each other's company. Because, I always say you never know. Like, my dad was a young man when he passed. My daughter's dad was a young man when he passed. So, I didn't know him as I was maturing into a young woman, like I was a teenager. So I didn't know him in my 20s. I didn't know him in my 30s. And wow, I would love to know if he would be proud of me today, if he would be, just acknowledging of the fact that I took what I learned from him, of the need to be kind, the need to be understanding, the need to be loving. And I always told you all about my dad. And if you didn't know before, you know now. My dad and mother both would feed everybody that came off the street. If they needed something to eat, if they need clothes to wear, my dad would do that. My dad would help people find work. He would help them find places to stay, like rooms or in a flat in New York. So he was a good man, and he modeled that for us. And all of my siblings, as well as myself, we probably done some of that stuff to our detriment, because we have that need to give. But he stood up to the duty of being a dad, and he formed the allegiance with us when we were young. And that's what it says, that we should be passed. It should be passed on. That we understand that when you're family, you're family, and when you're a good father, it shows. Okay. The next is tenable, and the tenable is able to be maintained or defended against attack or objection. So in this, it talks about that they put themselves in a position that they're going to protect their family. They're going to look out for all their needs, whatever those needs are. It could be that they don't need much or they need a lot, but they're going to stand in the gap. They're going to stand in the gap. And it says they're going to be the ones who will be defending their children, or defending, and they're looking at the reasonableness of it. They're looking at the variableness of it, the conceivableness of understanding their role, and being justifiable. That they know what they're doing is not only justifiable for their children, but from anyone else dealing with their children. It says they're looking at the rationalness of it, the workableness of it, the acceptable, the believable, the sound, and the sustainable. So all those talks about the tenable of the fact of how they're going to do what they can to protect their family. They're going to stand in the gap. They're going to stand out front. I remember one time when I was really young, and there was my sister was much older, and she was dating, and my mother and father didn't like the little guy she was dating. Well, my sister finally got a place of her own and moved to another area of New York. And the guy kept coming around because I looked a lot like my sister. So he swore that I was my sister. Well, my father, my father made him jump three. We lived three on the third floor flat, okay, in New York. And he jumped from the fourth floor all the way down to the ground and ran away. But he said, he was telling him, well, I want to talk to your daughter. My dad said, she's only 13. How could you be talking to her? You're looking for Shirley. Shirley doesn't live here anymore. So sometimes you just never know what your parent, in this case my dad, was going to go through. But that guy didn't know. He was probably short on living. Okay, because sometimes you will go that far to protect your own. But he was showing that he knew his place on offering. And at this time, my dad had already had his first stroke. And he was still going to protect us. Still in a position of mindset, I got to do it. I have to do it. The H in father is for helper. It says a person who helps someone else. And that was consistent with my dad. I'm quite sure it was with yours. It talks about him being the assistant, the workmate, the teammate, understanding that he was a partner in this family, and he took his role on. Good morning, Patrice. That he took his role on and making sure everything was done right. That he was the parent to be dealt with on all issues, and whatever you needed, you could go to your father, and your father was going to help. I'm quite sure many of you, if your fathers have moved on to heaven and they're no longer here, you can still think of such fond memories about the men they were and how they made you feel protected, how they helped you out of so many things, how they would drive you places, how they would make sure you had money. My father would never let me go out anywhere and not make sure I had enough money if I needed to take a cab home. And that was when I was 15 years old. He said, well, yeah, you can go to the little dance at the school. However, I can't drive you. My mother didn't drive. He said, but here's money to make sure if something goes wrong and all the kids aren't walking back to your neighborhood here, then I need you to take a cab. And I took the money, but I gave it back to him because I didn't need it. My friends always made sure I got back to my door. So he was a helper. He was a helper. That's what fathers are. And so the next letter is E. And so for the E is that they're earnest. They basically, earnest is resulting from a showing of sincere conviction. They understand. They're earnest. They're earnest about what they're going to do. They take on the role of being a father to the point where my daughter needs me. And I've even seen it where, say the father was a widow, a widower, and being a widower, his daughters took over for him, but he said, "No, I'm okay. I understand. You don't want nobody up in here. I get it. I get that. I get it." And sometimes you have to just realize that your children know what they want you to do, and they'd like to say, "Don't do it." But here you go. Good morning, OJ. Good morning, Trey. So you'd like to say that you don't want them to do it, but the father, if he's in a position to marry again and wants to, sometimes you as a child need to back down. And now, if you know that he's being mistreated, and you know that they're only wanting him because they think he got some money, then I would certainly say step up. Make sure you know what's going on. The R in father is for rationale. It says a set of reasons or logical basis for a cause or action, or a particular belief. So to me, my dad was always rational. He didn't come off with crazy stuff. Even when, my sister was starting to date, he would give her sound things and try to be, rational with her. What time to come home, what to wear, all those kinds of things to make sure that she was safe. And he always talked about us being safe. I just always remember those conversations, and he would just say, and I was young, so when my dad left this world, I remember him, having the stroke and being taken out, and he looked up at me, and even though he couldn't talk, I understood what he said. It's like, take care of yourself. And sometimes we have to understand that, words aren't always necessary. Sometimes it's just in the look. It's letting them letting you know how much they love you, how much they appreciated you, and how much you gave to them by just being your own kind as a child. So when we're rational, we're talking about the reasoning of stuff, our logic, our philosophy, our thinking, our sense of of self and of purpose. Good morning, Janice. Good morning, Curtis. Cuts. It talks about just our sense of doing things right, our hypothesis. What do we stand on? What do we believe in? It's our thesis, our motive, our motivation, our explanation, our vindication, and our excuse. All those things are part of our rationalness. And sometimes we're with children. You could have a period where you're not rational. Somebody say something wrong to your child, or they do something against your child or to your child, then you may throw all rationale out the window. You can't handle it. So all those things really are the sum of what fathers can be. They can be rational. They can be earnest. They can really be helpers, and they can be tenable, meaning that they have this thing about understanding what they need to defend. They can be, they can have this allegiance towards the family, where the family comes first. And I know for our family, there was always God, and then, the spouses. And so that's how they lived their lives, my mother and father. And then you talk about they are just aligned in the family. They're aligned that they are the head, and that they would call the shots. And as I said, except for discipline, my dad handled everything, all the business, anything that needed to be done, anything needed to be fixed. My dad did it all. Anybody needed to get point A to point B, my dad did it. He would fix food for people. For my mother was a member of the Sincerity Club. And in the Sincerity Club, my dad was known as the chef. And he would actually prepare foods for all the women that came to meetings. And the meetings would rotate around, old stuff. They would rotate around to the different houses. And, those days we ate good, the kids, because we would get a chance to get some of that food that they would make. But that's all about the father. So let's talk about some of the questions we have about fathers. And here's the questions. And it says, if your father is still living, Send him, and this is questions or statements. Good morning, Maurice. It says, if your father is still living, send him a virtual hug and tell him that you love him. You know, if they're gone and they've moved on to glory, send up the love, send up the prayers, talk about him, talk to him. You know, I talk to my dad every once in a while, something that happened that makes me laugh that he used to do or I did, and I would talk to him about it. Say, okay, Dad, you know, did you get that one? Because I do believe that, you know, that even though he can't come back, he's looking down. He's looking down. It says, if he's gone, also send them up the love. And it says, now, the real question, the next question, it says, do you have a fond memory that you made with your dad? You know, do you have a fond memory? Or if you have one that isn't fond, write it down. Write it down. What is it? Get in touch with it. You know, to me, fathers should be celebrated just like mothers. And I know our mother was always made a big deal for our Mother's Day. My mom made it a big deal for my dad, but then I'd go to other people's houses and they said, oh, yeah, it's just a day. It was just a day. But we made it special because, well, we made our dad feel special most days. You know, he used to like me to make him stuff. I would call myself making a cake in my easy bake oven or whatever that little thing was. I'd be making him something. He said, well, I'm going to try it. He didn't like it. And then this next one says, has the COVID-19 made it difficult for you to visit your parent? You know, I have a friend here that she is now in like a nursing type facility, and all nursing homes are pretty much closed down to having any visitation. So I got to visit with her through the door. But if that's been a situation for you, speak on it. You know, the fact that that the COVID-19 has really changed a lot of relationships, made them difficult to get to, made them what I would call in the time of real need. Because to me, when a person is in the hospital or in a nursing facility, they want company. They need company to stay in touch with reality, to stay in touch with family, to keeping that bond, that connection going on. And so to me, every time I go and, you know, I can't, you know, see them up close, and I'm looking at them through the door, and I'm looking at all the changes that have occurred, I know for me, COVID-19 has just been extremely different. It's been very different because, you know, I think the people that really need the love may not be able to get, may not be able to get to them to give it to them, you know, especially if they're starting to maybe lose sight or lose their cognitive skills and lose their ability to get around, you know, because those are probably the kind of things that got them in those facilities in the first place. But anyway, that's what we talked about today was fathers. Celebrate the goodness of them, the fact that if you were fortunate enough to have a good father, acknowledge it. If they've moved on, certainly acknowledge it. You know, send them some shouts up all over the weekend. And certainly talk about your good memories of your dad. Make it where you can maybe join in with other siblings. Have a video chat about your dad on Zoom or you know, call up one of your siblings and ask them some questions. Hey, do you remember this? And then make it a good weekend. Make it a good weekend where you're enjoying your thoughts and your love for the father that you were given. Have a wonderful weekend. And I'm going to ask you on the way out, are you stuck? Periodically, yes, we are. We all get stuck. But don't get stuck on not saying something to your father if he's still alive. And certainly send up the prayers. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.